Greetings, everyone. Hello again. Welcome again to our reading Machiavelli's Prince. Today, on this thing, we are now doing chapter 14 of the Prince, which deals with the question of what a prince should do about the militia. Again, we're using Leopold de Alvarez's translation of the Prince. You can find the link below to find how to get it. You can go get it on Amazon or a place like this. You can probably even find them used, but there's the link. The Prince, this chapter 23 about the militia, is 5 paragraphs in characteristic long paragraphs. So let's start. First paragraph: a prince then ought to have no other object, nor any other thought, nor take anything else for his art, but war, its orders, its discipline. And for this is the only art awaiting one who commands. So he makes the argument, the art of war. The art of war here is the art of commanding, he says, in the sense. This is the art, this is the only art awaiting one who commands. And therefore here, this is the thing, and therefore, what do a prince should do? Not anything else other than thinking about and no other object or any other thought or anything else for his art but war, in that sense. And next sentence. And it is of such virtue that not only does it maintain those who are born princes, but many times men of private fortune rise to degree by it, semicolon, that one sees, on the contrary, that princes, when they have thought more of niceties of life than of arms, have lost their state. Period. In other words, if you think about being nice or soft and doing like this, you'll lose your state. In other words, prince-mates who are born princes, who then all of a sudden, for pleasantries and things like this, will come to lose their state. And he says, next sentence, he goes, and the first cause that makes you lose it is you neglected this art. And the cause that makes you acquire it is to be professed in this art. Now, the you here is very interesting. The first you he goes here is the second person familiar here is used. Again, this is that he goes between the formal, courteous, formal, and that's here he goes to the you of the you this is between him and you, personal. It's personal. The subject, the Alvarez on page 90, the first note here goes, the subject of this art of warfare is how the prince must become professed in, to the exclusion of everything else. This subject is the highest one, the proper preparation of the body and the intellect of the prince, the highest kind of man. In other words, it's supposed to be his body and his mind should be trained to war. And this term militia is therefore used here in the most general sense of the military things or the thing of war. So militia is not just militia in terms of the guards who protect and maintain things, or a civil order, civil guards, but this is, the militia here means the things of war, the things, military things and things of war. In other words, you need to focus. The king must, the ruler must focus himself here on these things, a prince. And you must, therefore, if you don't have this art, it will be the reason why you lost or lose things. In other words, the cause. In other words, if you lose it, is because you didn't have the art, or you neglected the art. In terms of not only the knowledge, but also of the physicality of the art. And then if you want to acquire it, is because, again, you professed yourself of the art. Now, a second paragraph, he says, Francisco Forza, by being armed from a private man, became Duke of Milan, and his sons, by avoiding the hardships of arms, from dukes became private men. In other words, so he opens with an example, that the father, through hardship and toughness and knowledge of arms, becomes duke. Now, the sons all were dukes and or privileged, became, by not possessing in the knowledge of arms, ceased being princes and became private men. For among the other consequences which the evil of being disarmed brings you, you are made contemptible. And this is one of those infamies from which a prince ought to guard himself, as will be said below. If you're starting next chapter, he'll talk about virtues and vices. But here is the end of the arms discussion. But then, what is the danger of being? But this is a prince, but also I would say people. If you're unarmed or disarmed, this is, in other words, he says, being from other consequences which the evil of being disarmed brings upon you. From the consequences, all the consequences of this evil, the consequences of the evil. The evil is what? Being disarmed. This is not only true about princes, it's about peoples too. And being unarmed leaves you to consequences. Those consequences are what? Well, the consequences for a powerful person of being unarmed is that they're made contemptible. In other words, being contemptible. They have to contempt people. And actually, the same one. If you're unarmed, there's a famous saying from the cowboy days. An armed society is the polite side. Because in cowboy days, if you piss someone off, you had a gunfight. You piss someone off, it provoke a fight. You get in a fight. And therefore, people were polite. Now, they say that in American drug gangs and big inner city gangs. If you diss the boss or diss somebody, there'll be a gunfight. There'll be a fight. Well, of course, then there's always respect. Armed people will demand respect. Demand it because they're armed, and they're going to demand that they not be and therefore it's actually this is the same thing. Samurai society, Asian samurai society that shaped Japan's culture. Why are the Japanese so polite society? Well, because these samurais would take honor and chop people's heads off. That's the whole thing. You read up stories about how a young samurai would sharpen his knife by chopping the heads off of unsuspecting people. Of course, therefore, you don't want to provoke one of these people, right? So you're polite. In other words, an armed society is a polite society. Being unarmed means you're unable to defend yourself. Being unarmed means you're unable to achieve the goods you need to want. If you're going to have to, not only to secure yourself, you're not able to secure yourself, but then in terms of a ruler, not even enabled to. That if force is required to get what you want, you don't have the means to get what you want. Okay? So, let us continue. For between someone who is armed and someone who is unarmed, there is no proportion whatsoever. Between one who is armed and one who is disarmed, there's no proportion whatsoever. And it's not reasonable that he who is armed willingly obeys him who is unarmed. In other words, it is not reasonable that he who is armed willingly obeys him who is unarmed, nor that the unarmed be secure among armed servants. In other words, if your servants are armed and you're unarmed, because why? Because the distance between the unarmed and the unarmed is there's no proportionality. It is I'm able to defend myself and able to take someone's life. I'm able to harm and to defend myself. I'm not able to harm you, and I may not be able to defend me. Okay, this idea that you're unarmed. So, in other words, there's no proportionality. He continues that sentence, who is unarmed, nor is the unarmed to secure themselves among armed servants. So he ends there. And since, And since there is disdain on the one side and suspicion on the other, it is impossible that they work well together. Okay? The unarmed the unarmed will look down not upon the armed. In other words, the armed will look at the unarmed with, I'm better than you. I can kill you. I can take you. The armed will look down on the unarmed. Remember, he says the unarmed are looked down with disdain. You're not feared. You're unarmed. I'm not fearing you. You're not a threat. I'm armed. You do. Therefore, in this situation of the armed servants and the unarmed master, well, what happens here? He's going to be suspicious. This guy's going to be looking at these guys and say, "Oh my God!" And these guys will look down at him and say, "What a weakling! What a horrible!" So therefore, this is not going to work well together. They're not going to work well together. And he says there. And therefore, among other infelicities. Infelicities means that, things that don't lead to good things. Felicities mean being able to be harmonious, works friendly with each other. Infelicity is the opposite, right? Among the difficulties or problems, right? Among these infelicities, which I have mentioned, a prince who does not himself understand military things cannot be esteemed by his soldiers, nor can he have trust in them. So you don't understand. Okay, this is the other thing. Let's not talk about soldier. If you're a businessman or a business person doing something, and you're going to do a business, and you're the owner of the thing, and you don't know what your business does, are the workers going to respect you? They have to, because you're the boss. You hire fire. But if you don't know what the hell you're doing, and you're you don't know what you do and how to do it or anything like that, are they going to listen to you? They might have to. They might have to submit to you, but they don't respect you. They'll come have contempt for you. They will, and if the chance that they can harm you, they will harm you. In that sense, in the business, this is true for a manager too. If you're a manager of something, just think of this. If your subordinates think you're ignorant of what you're doing, they have no respect. Will not obey you, not follow you. You need to earn their respect. And how do you earn respect? By knowing what they know. Maybe even better than they know it. Okay? So therefore, only by being possessing this, then what? The soldiers will by knowing war, the soldiers will trust them. They will have. In other words, by not knowing it, what happens? He cannot have the esteems of the things. In other words, he does not have the esteems of the soldiers, and the soldiers will not. He cannot trust them. You cannot trust the workers. In other words, if you're the boss who doesn't know, they don't respect you, and you can't really trust them, because what will they do? They'll steal. They'll do things. They think you're stupid, and therefore, because they think. Well, you are stupid in the sense you don't know what they're doing. And because you know what they're doing, they'll steal you blind, okay? This is why people who don't know what restaurants should not buy a restaurant or do something. Because the people who will be running it will steal you blind. Again, this is like what he's saying. Therefore, the use of war is the thing you're not going to have respect if you don't know it by the soldiers. And you cannot... and if you're relying on soldiers who are armed, they're going to be like the case of the unarmed being served. The servants are armed and you're not. Well, they have contempt for you, and you're suspicious of them. Okay, this is where he leads. This leads us to our third paragraph of this paragraph chapter, middle. He ought, therefore, never to lift his thought from the exercise of war. And he ought to exercise more in peace than in war, which he can do in two modes, one with works and the other with intellect, in other words, thought, deeds. Now, this is, again, works, intellect, opera and mente, the mind, mente. He translates two things, opera and mente, in other words, works and intellect. And, comma, the next paragraph, next sentence, okay? And as for works, besides keeping his own arms well ordered and exercised, he ought to be always out on the chase, and by that means to accustom his body to the hardships, and also in part to learn the nature of sights, to know how mountains rise, and how the valleys open, and how the plains lie, and to understand the natures of rivers and marshes, and in this to put the greatest care. They're saying, okay, this idea. This is why nobility used to go hunting and riding horses. Okay, they would go riding horses, and they would go ride their horses, and they'll go go riding and chasing. They'll chase after dogs. Fox hunting. Why fox hunting happened? Hunting with hounds, with dogs. Hunting would do what? Chasing. You're always on the chase, and then when you're always practicing. You always do you're riding your horse even when you're not hunting. In that sense, you are doing it. Why? So that you know you're exercising your body. You're exerting energy, exercising things. You're doing things. And the next thing you're doing, you're also learning the land. You're educating your mind by your seeing the lands. And he repeats this, right? He says, let's do it. You learn the natures of the land, right? Not only make your body, you're energizing and developing your body, but you're also doing it in your mind, because while you're exercising learn the nature of sights. How mountains rise, how valleys open, how plains lie, the natures of rivers and marshes, and how to and these things must be the greatest care. Now he says, this knowledge is useful in two modes. First, he learns to know his own country. You learn, you know your own. That's why it is. And he can better understand how to defend it. Okay? And by means of his knowledge and experience of these sights, he will comprehend easily any other sight that he may necessarily have to examine for the first time. Okay? In other words, once I understand terrain features and terrains, how terrain features work, all the different aspects of the terrain, how mountains rise, how valleys, how rivers go this way, how marshes work, how all these things. You learn the terrains, how the nature of plains, the nature of certain fields. All the traits of these are universals. In other words, and whereas something like here is going to be elsewhere, what's true about here will be true about there. No. If a thing is the same, if two things are the same, what is valid in one will be valid in the other. That's, Euclid's law, right? About logic. This is the same thing about territories and lands. He says, for the hillocks and valleys and rivers and marshes, for example, in Tuscany, have a certain similarity to those other provinces, so that from the knowledge of a site in one province, one can easily come to a knowledge of the others. Here, this is again, De Alvarez has a note, and to Discourses, note 5 here, on page 91, he has note. He refers you to Discourses, book 3, chapter 39, which says that a captain ought to be a knower of sights. Now, look at the Episcopal Dedicatory. Now, De Alvarez suggests we should compare this statement with the Episcopal Dedicatory, where a prince, he said, to know the low places, but not the high ones. Here it is said that a prince should know all sights. So there's a contradiction. The prince will know that, but a prince should know both, the high and the low. If anyone studies Henry IV, Part 1 and Part 2, why does Prince Hal hang out with that Falstaff? Why does he hang out with someone so low? So, because the prince ought to know the low and the high. He should know not only the high in terms of the mountains, but the valleys, but he also should know the whole range of human types. Because until you know all the human types, you're not as what is true about places is equally true about the types of people. Okay, this is an interesting thing about this. The prince should know the types of lands, but he also this is why Shakespeare's point here is that Shakespeare and Henry IV Part 1 and Part 2 will have Hal, the Prince Hal, doing what? Hanging out with the lower sort, being instead of just hanging. And everyone's complaining, why don't you just hang out with? But this makes why he's so successful, as king. He will know all the types of men. And as a prince, will be able to know all the types of sites. You all know all the sites so that you can always take advantage for your decisions. By knowing the types of men, you will be able to likewise know how to take advantage of them. Take advantage of different types of people. When are you able to get this person to do what you want and how to do it? Now, likewise, that he ought to, this idea that you should guard this way. The Tuscany, in other words, now he says, you should know so that the knowledge of one site in province can easily become the knowledge of another. Okay, and that the prince who lacks this ability lacks the first requirement of a captain, great leader. For this teaches one how to find the enemy, choose encampments, lead armies, prepare orders of battles, and lay siege to town to your advantage. If you don't know the land, this is why knowing the land is one of the most important things in warfare. This is why if you don't know the land, the big thing in warfare is not fighting. It's picking the best place to fight and picking the place that is most advantageous for you. In other words, you should never let the enemy pick your place. Because, of course, if he's a good enemy, if he's smart, the enemy picks a place that you look at it and say, my God, why did he pick this? I mean, everything favors me. Then you have a fool as an enemy. But a wise enemy will do what? Pick the territory so that you always define the field of battle, whatever battle it is, war or political conflict or things. You don't engage until you can win. That's someday I will probably do Sun Tzu, but you should never engage. You know you can win. If you can win, then you can do it. Now, what he says there, it's a natural. Remember, go back all to the beginning. It's a natural desire to acquire, right? It's natural for men to want to acquire. The blame is not wanting to acquire. The blame is trying to acquire things that you're not able to get. Okay? Here's the problem. What he's saying here is you need to have the knowledge of all these things. The knowledge of all this land allows you to do what? Allows you to prepare things. Now, this metaphor, same thing. The knowledge, if I say the knowledge of war is also the knowledge of men, so as the knowledge of land leads us to the different types of land so that you're best able to decide where to fight, where to put the advantage, where to make, in other words, where to find the enemy. In other words, where, but the land will tell you where the enemy can go and how they can go, where to find it. So being able to navigate. This is one of the things. How many of you dumb kids these days, in order to find a place, you turn to your cell phone or your tablet, looking on Google Maps or maps to find out where you are and having to do this. Navigate. No north, no south, no locations. You can today we are dependent upon this, and by being dependent upon this, we're dependent on others. What happens when the Google map is down or you can't access it? You're lost. I can't get from here and there. Well, this is the thing. Learn the land. Learn the layout. Know where you are. Know the location. This allows you, this gives you power. Not, like you said, knowledge is power, right? That famous line from, you always learn in school. Knowledge is power. It's the ability, and what is power? The ability to get what you want. The ability to get and enjoy what you want. And in other words, power is nothing more than the ability to get and enjoy the thing that you want, you wish to possess. And you can do this, and therefore, what is this? Therefore, the prince who cannot know this, he can't be a leader in this situation. He doesn't know war, he doesn't know the lands. Oh God, lead your soldiers to get slaughtered. Okay? So you're able to know the land, you know the things, you're able to do what? You lead army. In other words, find the enemy. Choose a good encampment. Places where, the best, where you can best protect yourself, best secure yourself. Then what? Lead armies. Prepare orders of battle. How are you going to get your orders of battle? How are the troops going to be located and where? Where are the troops? And what troops are going to where? What kind of thing? On marshes and watery areas, you don't. In marshes in that area, you don't really put your horse there. That's kind of stupid, right? You put horses in marsh. You have your horse units guarding marshes, or they can guard it, but they can't attack out of it. If you're playing an attack and all of a sudden you have to move your horses through marshes, that's kind of a disadvantage. You'd put your infantry or something to block there. So if you're going to defend against it, in other words, some terrains are going to be your friends. Other terrains are going to act as gateways for people to come in here. So the terrain will teach you things about things. This is the point he's trying to get here. The orders of battles and the question of how do you lay a siege to a town to your advantage. Do all these things. Find the enemy, choose the encampment, lead armies, prepare orders of battle, and lay siege to town to your advantage. Not to your opponent's advantage. If you don't know the lay of the land and how land works, and by knowing your land, you can think by again. Remember, this is analogies. This is why we've argued. He's constantly argues from analogy here. This is what's a thing that's, if these two things are similar or true, what's true here is true here. So what's true in the piece of land in Tuscany, your province here, is going to be true in Tuscany. What's true in your province that you live is about the river and about that. If the river is similar size or similar thing, the marsh is similar, it's going to be the same. In other words, what's valid there is valid here. And likewise, any place new you learn will be valid in the similar place in that sense. This is why the prince needs to constantly do that and change and do this. Now, we can go to the fourth paragraph. Starting on this page 89 of the Alvarez, he says, among the praises that have been given by writers to Philipmon, the prince of the Archaeans, it has been said in times of peace he never thought of anything but the modes of war. And when he was in the countryside with his friends, he stopped and reasoned with them. If the enemy were on that hill, and we were to be found here with our army, which of us would have the advantage? Question. In other words, he goes, the colon up there, and he starts with a series of questions. And how would we advance to find them and still keep our order? If we if we should want to retreat, how should we do it? If they were to retreat, how could we follow them? Quote unquote. So we have a series of questions. First, if the enemy on that hill and we were there to found with our armies, which of us would have the advantage? Who would have the advantage? Well, he's on the hill. We're not. Advantage him, right? How would we advance to find him and still keep our order? In other words, how do we move and get things so that we can still keep our order? Okay. Well, if we should want to retreat, how we're to do it and still keep our order, right? And if they were to retreat, how can we follow them? How can we go after them? These are the kind of questions. And as he went along, he put to them all chances which may befall an army. He listened to their opinions, expressed his own, and collaborated it with reasons, such that because of those continued cogitations which he led his armies, there could never arise no accident for which he had not already had a remedy. In other words, he always constantly made remedies. In other words, you should train your mind by what? You're reading the minds of others. You read, always look at the problems, look at the things. Right? So the example he gives of like traveling in a terrain features is Philip Bowman, the Prince of the Achaeans, right? He gives a Greek example, okay? Now he ends that paragraph to the last paragraph. Philip Bowman was excellent because he was continually discussing and looking at these things and figuring this, and the mind was always working on these kind of things. And what happened, therefore, if he ever came a problem, he didn't. In other words, it was what when he led his army to the situation, no accident, no situation. In other words, no accident which he did not have a remedy for, no event, no occurrence, no accident in the battlefield that would arise that he did not have a remedy for, because he was thinking about it. He occasioned and he inquired others constantly to think about it, and learning their opinions and learning things constantly learning. Now we lead to the fifth paragraph and final paragraph here. But as for the exercises of the intellect, that was the body. Now the mind, right? The intellect. The prince ought to read histories, and to consider in them the actions of excellent men. Today, when you study history, you study social history about not excellent men, but by everyday, ordinary people. Or you talk about gender equality or whatever, blah, 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 blah. Machiavelli would say, fuck that shit. Machiavelli says, no, if you're going to be a ruler, study the great. Study the histories of the great people. You imitate the great. You don't imitate the average and the defective. Let's think about this. Today's education is we all learn how to be transsexual, blah, 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 right? And bullshit. You actually, the great achievers, the great heroes, who cares what some of them are going to be whatever, These people are those who are excellent, those who achieve something that's worth imitating. Go back to the great chapter 6 about the great, in other words, being, if you're going to want to be great, you should follow the great. Here he's saying the same thing. Read the histories. My God, if you want to do this, histories, start with, read, my God, start with Thucydides, Peloponnesian Wars, go with that. Read Tacitus, Livy, all the Polybius for the Greeks, the fight with the Persians. There are, in fact, look at the Landmark series. Xenophon's his own account of the Hellenistic War, or his Anabasis, where he talks about his time in the mercenaries, leading for Cyrus the Younger, the second Cyrus, who hired him and then gets killed, and the Greeks have to fight them way back home. The great event, and anyone who learned Greek when I was a kid, when you learned Greek, that was the first book you worked through the Greek with. That was the introduction books, the adventure story. This is the day when kids, were taught adventure stories and great stuff. Thinking that you just give them today, we don't. Oh no! We give them simpler. Give them gentler, nicer things. Horse nonsense, Machiavelli would say. Imitate the great. Read your history, the history of warfare and great political men. One of the greatest biographies is, Churchill himself, a great man, wrote a book about his ancestor, John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough. At the time it was a 4-volume work. Vale was a 2-volume work. not abridged. My God. Now, he wrote this just before the Second World War. During the time he was, warning against Hitler. This Marlborough is his moment where he's learning. In other words, he already was doing things. Now, this is even therefore, even him in his 50s is now Churchill is learning history, learning again, turning to the great. Again, so therefore you should be doing the same thing. Read your histories. Follow the great. Learn it, he says. Now what he says. We should consider them and the actions of the excellent men, to see how they govern themselves in wars, to examine the causes of their victories and loss, in order to avoid the latter and imitate the former, and, above all, to do as has been done in the past by some excellent men, who has chosen to imitate some before him, who was praised and glorified, and who always kept his deeds and actions before him, as it was said that Alexander the Great imitated Achilles, Caesar, Alexander, Scipio, Cyrus, period. What is he saying here? Even the great had examples of the great. All of us, again, go back and look at chapter 6. We all imitate. Monkey see, monkey do. Remember that. Everyone imitates. So if you have, if the role models and the thing around you are a bunch of peasants and idiots and drunks, you're gonna, of course, you're gonna imitate them. You're gonna monkey see, monkey do. You're gonna be just like them. If you want to be great, you can't imitate the moronic and the silly. You got to imitate the great. You have to seek to become them. You have to do what they do and do what they behave. Learn. You have to, like I says, you can this idea that the Machiavelli is not the person who says you're condemned to your class and condemned to your thing. You're condemned to that if you can't get off your ass and change. If you're just going to be there indolent, lazy, and willing to accept it, you're going to, of course, go nowhere. Therefore, all you potheads, doing your pot, no wonder why you're going to be home with mommy in your 30s. I don't care. If doing that is fun for you, great. Wow. But don't expect greatness in life. And I say, well, who are you to talk? Well, I don't care. I want to be a teacher. I'm doing what I want to do. Is that going to be the same about you? Remember that. You need, what you want to do in life, you need to be able to do it. Therefore, you do that. You need, and often this requires work and sacrifice. So here, what is he saying? If we talked about the body before in this chapter is the mind. And what is the mind? You read history and imitate the great men. Learn their mistakes to avoid them. And learn their successes and why they happen, so you can imitate them when they're available to you. So again, and he says, even great men, Alexander had his idea of Achilles. So therefore, not only histories. Now this is, for Machiavelli, history is also poetry here. Iliad and Odyssey, that's these are the first, then Iliad and Odyssey examples. The Iliad, in that sense. Achilles, the great warrior. Alexander used him as a model. And there's Alexander, and I forget who's the history of that. I know there's an author. It's in the Landmark History series has multiple volumes that are good. Caesar, Machiavelli doesn't mention Caesar. Caesar is another case, right? Then what happens here? We have, he does mention Caesar, but Caesar imitates Alexander, right? But then who does Scipio, who is before Caesar, imitates Cyrus. Some will argue even Alexander imitated Cyrus, but there's something going on here. Why does he pick that? And then whoever reads the life of Cyrus, written by Xenophon, again, Xenophon and Cyrus is the Cyropaedia. But there's two. There's two lives of Cyruses. The life of Cyrus is the education, the Cyropaedia, by Xenophon. He says, whoever reads the life of Cyrus written by Xenophon will immediately recognize in the life of Scipio how much in chastity, affability, humanity, and liberality Scipio conforted himself to the things of Cyrus that Xenophon had written. Now this, again, foot 10. On Xenophon, see Discourses 2, Book 2, Chapter 2, and Chapter 13, Book 3, Chapter 20, 22 and 39. He is the one, in other words, he is the one student of Socrates that Machiavelli cites in the Prince. But his citations are all from the Saripaideia, and also the Hero. You can argue maybe the Hero. No, the citation not the Hero. But he talks about Hero, which is written by Xenophon. Okay, a play about it's called on Hero, which is some again talked about the tyrant. It's a dialogue by Xenophon. It's a Socratic dialogue by Xenophon. In fact, this is interesting. But a Socratic dialogue where there's no Socrates, but a poet. So that's even more interesting. Which are about the Saripaideia, which is about education of a prince. Xenophon was a private man, a general historian, and a philosopher who presented himself to be wholly as a practical man. One may therefore perhaps understand Machiavelli's attraction to Xenophon, because the latter seemed far more concerned than with either Plato or Aristotle with the effectual truth of things opposed as to the ineffectual truth. Okay, this is why Xenophon looks, and Xenophon is a great author. You talk about horses, he'll have his Xenophon will talk about. Yes, he writes his Saripaideia. He will write his about the education of the great King Cyrus. He'll talk about the Anabis, the journey up the river, which is about his the mercenary captain. It's an adventure story. Basically, the bunch of mercenaries get sent to a place to fight a war. The battle doesn't go right. The boss, the leader that he's going to follow, dies. The army, instead of surrendering to the enemy, decides they're going to elect a new leader, and they elect Xenophon. And Xenophon takes the army out, navigates them to go home. Okay, and the great adventure story, getting home. But then also Xenophon also is famous for his memorabilia about Socrates, a book about Socrates. And then he's also a dialogue called the Symposium about, again, Socrates is in it. And then he writes an apology. Xenophon is we have two basic apologies left of Socrates. One is of, there's another one, I think there's fragments of them. But the two that succeed is, one is Plato's and the other one is Xenophon's. In fact, the apologies are a very interesting one in that sense. And he blames Socrates for, Xenophon will blame Socrates, big talk, getting him killed. In other words, it implies that Socrates wanted to die. Xenophon is the man of action. He will write about oikonomikos, about household management. He then will write a Hero about talk about on Hero, which is the discussion of the tyrant, how to reform a tyranny. He will talk about ways and means, economic affairs, about how can Athens, a policy plan to make Athens more effective. He's a statesman. He has statesman works, and then also he has about hunting, and how about horses and hunting and dogs. Hunting won't talk about dogs and how different way of hunting, and about hunting with horses. Okay, in other words, he has all of these practical books as well. Xenophon, in fact, the hunting stuff is very interesting. And this is why Xenophon was so famous in that Middle Ages, in the Renaissance and things like this, because everyone would be reading on horses. Any gentleman would read Xenophon on how to hunt and how to hunt on horses, and would learn about him, both the Saripaideia and about Cyrus the Great, but also his story of the adventure of leading his men back to Greece. Not Cyrus, but Xenophon himself. So this is why Machiavelli prefers the Xenophon. Why? Because he's a man of action. Again, is he imitating Xenophon? Is Machiavelli imitating Xenophon in the same way that he recommends to others that they should imitate others? But then an imitation is not mere imitation, but sometimes it is taking the best from them, but avoiding the worst. Right? It's not just mere imitation. It's taking that which is best from them and adopting it to them and using it for your circumstances and your things. This is what he means here. Now, if we go through his example of things, right, he says, that, again, the example of Scipio shows how much that he relied on Xenophon. He says, a wise prince ought to observe these same modes and never be lazy in peacetime, but with industry make capital of them, in order that they have the value in adversities, so that when fortune changes, he will be found ready to resist them. In other words, what is resisted are the adversaries, not fortune here. Again, see chapter 20. The adversities, the difficult times that are coming. These fortune, you just have to rely. In other words, fortune will offer opportunities. So what happens is you need to have in other words, you need to know the wars, you need to know the virtues, you need to have the knowledge and what to fight your enemies, the enemies you have, and the adversaries. The adversaries are your enemies, the things that you're challenged with. The adversities are the difficult things. In other words, the knowledge and your virtue will help you overcome the difficult things. So when fortune changes, he's able to resist those adversities. So when things are good, you can benefit. But then fortune does, you're able to resist the negative things, the adversarial, the adversities that can, the negative things that come with it, or come against. Fortune brings changes of things. Fortune can bring you good, or it can bring you bad. So that if it brings you good, you can take advantage of it to achieve it. And when fortune brings you bad things, do what? You're able to You're able to bear them and resist them. Okay. So here we end this chapter. It's at our typical time. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put the comment below. If you like this video, please like it and share it with a friend. If you're interested in, please want to see more of similar things, do like it. Again, there's the link below about my social media if you want to follow me or whatever. Also, again, if you want to know more about the translation we're using, there's the link down there below, as we mentioned earlier. Okay, today this ends our time. Well, take care and have a good one. Bye-bye.